At 47, my husband confessed to me on his deathbed. He told me that the daughter we raised was not my child, but his sister-in-law's. Back then, while I was unconscious after childbirth, he swapped our baby with his sister-in-law's. However, his sister-in-law's child had developed a high fever at the age of 6. Due to a delay in medical treatment, the child suffered brain damage. Perhaps my expression was truly grim. He wept bitterly in repentance, saying he was sorry to me, and if there is a next life, he would still be willing to marry me, using a lifetime to make it up to me. He schemed against me my whole life, and he dares to even think about a next one? Only the incompetent would pin their hopes on the illusory rebirth and revenge in a next life. As for me, I generally settle grudges right then and there. And after all these years, hasn't he noticed? How does the child resemble him and his sister-in-law at all? After Eugene picked up the test report from the hospital, he shut himself in his study and didn't come out for the entire afternoon. I knew he was upset, so I didn't disturb him. Not long after, the doorbell rang. I went to answer it and found Eugene's sister-in-law Evelyn standing outside, with her daughter Sylvia behind her, the girl who suffered brain damage from a high fever when she was 6. Evelyn frowned, and her first words upon seeing me were, "Has Sophia come back?" Sophia is my daughter, 22 years old, still in college. I shook my head, "She hasn't," and added curiously, "What's going on?" Evelyn ignored me, pushing past me into the living room as naturally as if she were returning to her own home. I pulled Sylvia, who was standing at the door, inside as well. Turning around, I saw Evelyn sitting on the sofa, her arms crossed over her chest, watching us. "Nina, from my point of view, you and Sylvia actually look somewhat alike." Her gaze toward me was not friendly, and the corners of her mouth held a half-smile. I didn't respond. This wasn't the first time she had said Sylvia looked like me. We have no blood relation at all. How could the daughter she gave birth to possibly resemble me? I had just taken my seat across from Evelyn when she pressed on impatiently, "Eugene is already like this. Do you still plan to keep it from Sophia?" Eugene's medical report had only been in our hands for just over 2 hours. How did Evelyn learn everything so quickly? Before I could answer, the study door opened. Eugene, who had shut himself in his room since we got home, finally emerged. His eyes fixed on Evelyn, his lips twitched a couple of times, but in the end, he couldn't bring himself to utter the word sister-in-law. Today's follow-up examination report confirmed Eugene's condition, advanced stage lung cancer, already showing symptoms of metastasis and spread. He has missed the optimal window for treatment, and now only has a few months left to live. After a brief moment of eye contact, Evelyn spoke up first, "Eugene, I still think we shouldn't keep this from Sophia. She is your daughter, after all. What do you think?" She emphasized the words "your daughter." Eugene remained silent for quite some time before finally responding, "We shouldn't hide it from her." The two of them went back and forth, occasionally exchanging glances, completely disregarding my presence. I pretended not to notice. When I was younger, I didn't even care, so why bother getting angry with someone who's on the verge of death now? Eugene doesn't have many relatives left, his parents and brother have long passed away, and aside from me and our daughter, there's only his sister-in-law Evelyn and her daughter Sylvia. Seeing that Eugene was about to call Sophia, I stepped forward to stop him. "Sophia will be on summer break in just half a month, waiting a few more days won't hurt." After thinking for a moment, Eugene nodded and put away his phone. Evelyn's face darkened as she shot me a glare. "You're quite controlling as a mother, aren't you?" I smiled. What parent doesn't think about their child? "That's true," she said pointedly. "Unfortunately for this fool in my family, even if I wanted to plan for her, it wouldn't do much good." Sylvia, sitting beside me, lowered her head to play with her fingers, carefree and carefree, a stark contrast to the calculating look in her mother's eyes. "That sounds nice, but what has she ever planned for Sylvia?" A woman in her 20s with a buzz cut, wearing ill-fitting clothes, her face and body tanned a deep black, without a trace of femininity about her. Eugene walked over and sat on the same side of the sofa as Evelyn, with a person's distance between them. "Since everyone's here," I asked Eugene, "how do you want to proceed with the treatment?" Eugene rubbed his temples, looking utterly dejected. I haven't decided yet. His complexion looked terrible. Ever since the diagnosis, he seemed to have lost all his spirit and energy. Evelyn kept her head down, playing with her phone as if she hadn't heard what we were saying. Perhaps to prevent patients from losing the will to live, doctors always speak ambiguously. He wouldn't directly tell a patient that the illness is incurable, nor would he say it can be cured. Instead, he gives patients the illusion that if they undergo proper treatment, there might still be a chance of recovery. Eugene had been misled by this misconception. He had accumulated some savings from doing business over the years, and covering the expenses for later-stage treatment wouldn't be much of a problem. At this point, Evelyn suddenly chimed in, I think conservative treatment is still the way to go. It won't involve as much suffering. Eugene's face grew even paler. In his eyes, conservative treatment seemed equivalent to giving up. While he usually took Evelyn's advice to heart, matters concerning his own life were different. No matter how much we usually boast about not fearing death, when truly facing the brink of death, an unknown fear arises within the heart. When that unknown fear is amplified, a strong desire to survive emerges. Evelyn said she wanted to stay at my house, citing her concern that I wouldn't be able to take care of Eugene alone, and as his sister-in-law, she wanted to stay and help me. Eugene didn't say a word but turned to look at me, as if seeking my opinion. I do have work to handle, and I originally wanted to hire a caregiver for Eugene. Since Evelyn offered herself, I really had no reason to refuse. Then I'll have to trouble you, sister-in-law. Evelyn pouted, we're all family, no need to be so formal. As expected, Evelyn made herself right at home. That evening, she lay on the couch with a face mask on, binge-watching shows, and still found time to order me around to bathe her daughter. She said, I can't even remember how long it's been since the little dummy had a bath. Nina, why don't you wash her while you're at it? Sylvia was watching TV, even a simple Tom and Jerry chase scene could make her giggle for half the day. I still remember how smart and adorable this child was before the age of 6. Seeing her like this now, it seems having such a mother is just her fate. Sylvia and Sophia were born on the same day, with Sophia being 3 hours older than Sylvia. Sylvia hadn't had enough of the cartoons yet and struggled, unwilling to leave with me. Evelyn shot her a look of disgust and yelled, go take a shower. I clearly sensed Sylvia's body tremble violently. She crouched down, hugged her head, and let out a loud scream. This was a common stress reaction from being frequently beaten. The commotion in the living room was too loud, and Eugene also emerged from his room. He glanced at Sylvia, who was crouched on the floor, clutching her head and still screaming, then looked at Evelyn, somewhat impatiently asking, why are you yelling at her? Evelyn snorted coldly, I really regret not strangling her when she was born. She shot me several glances while saying these words. I observed everything indifferently from start to finish. Evelyn only has one child in her life, Sylvia, and how she chooses to treat her child is her own business. No one else has the right to interfere. After Eugene's friends learned of his illness, they all came to visit. With so many people around, it was inconvenient to have meals at home, so I arranged for a nearby hotel. Those who came were all longtime friends and partners of Eugene. They were all considerate of Eugene's condition, and during their visit, they only brought up topics that would cheer him up and shared some fun memories from the past. During this time, I noticed someone named Ryan who seemed to know Evelyn. Their eyes met several times, and their expressions seemed to convey something. Ryan left little impression on me. He only started interacting with Eugene a few years ago, and their relationship didn't seem particularly deep. Even Eugene was surprised that Ryan showed up today. I observed them quietly. At one point, Evelyn stepped out, and Ryan quickly followed, using the excuse of going to the restroom. It wasn't just the two of them leaving the dinner table, several other friends had stepped out during that time, so their departure didn't raise anyone's suspicions. They returned about 20 minutes later, one after the other. After coming back this time, Ryan's mood had clearly improved significantly. He also became much more talkative, and whether intentionally or not, he even brought up the topic of property during the conversation. The atmosphere at the dinner table grew heavy because of this topic. The smile on Eugene's face vanished completely, and the hand holding the chopsticks began to tremble slightly, uncontrollably. The friend sitting next to Ryan gave him a playful punch, trying to lighten the mood. Why bring that up? Our Eugene is blessed with great fortune. As soon as these words were spoken, a chorus of agreement followed, and just as the atmosphere seemed to be improving, Evelyn suddenly chimed in, he's not wrong, you know. Eugene, even if you don't think of others, at least consider your child, don't you? When she mentioned others, her eyes briefly swept over me, brimming with malice. Eugene and I both put down our chopsticks at the same time. This meal was absolutely impossible to continue. I drank 2 glasses of wine at dinner and went to bed early in the evening. I'm not sure how long I slept, but I was awakened by faintly audible arguing. Evelyn and Eugene were having a dispute, though I couldn't tell whether it was in the living room or the study. I cracked the door open a bit and heard Sophia's name, along with something about a will. What? Does Evelyn even want Eugene to include her in his will for the inheritance? Over these years, Eugene and I have had our respective jobs. In addition to his work, Eugene also partnered with some friends to run a few businesses. Whether they actually made money, I'm not sure, as we never discuss each other's income. The household expenses and those for Sophia are shared between us. I knew that Eugene had been secretly helping Evelyn out. With a child whose mental age remains at 5 or 6 years old, Evelyn genuinely can't work. All these years, I've simply pretended not to know. The next day, Eugene said he had thought it over and was ready to follow the treatment plan the doctor had given. This was within my expectations, and I replied, all right. After a moment of silence, Eugene added, Nina, I want to make a will. I walked over and took his hand. Eugene, don't overthink it. Let's just focus on following the doctor's treatment. It's not at that stage yet. Eugene's eyes reddened, a rare sight. He remained firm on drafting the will. He said, we only have Sophia. He intended to leave all the property to Sophia, asking if I had any objections. Evelyn chimed in with a sarcastic tone, Sophia is her daughter, why would she object? As she spoke, her eyes were evasive, not daring to meet mine. I smiled and said, yes, Sophia is my daughter, so of course I have no objections. After I finished speaking, Eugene and Evelyn visibly breathed a sigh of relief. During this time when Eugene was actively receiving treatment, he was also consulting a lawyer about drafting a will. In just half a month, his hair has fallen out significantly, and his complexion looks worse and worse. I hired a caregiver to take care of Eugene together with Evelyn. Evelyn said she would help me take care of Eugene, but she has always been used to her freedom. How could she possibly stay in the hospital? Moreover, it seems she has taken a lover in the past 2 years, and they are inseparable, completely infatuated with each other. Not only did she fail to come to the hospital to care for Eugene, but she also left Sylvia for Eugene and the caregiver to look after. The caregiver naturally wasn't happy about it, and after he complained to me, I raised his salary. Anyway, the money for hiring the caregiver was paid by Eugene. After I didn't see Evelyn during my 3rd visit to the hospital, I asked Eugene, has my sister-in-law not been coming to the hospital these past few days? Eugene had already lost a significant amount of weight, his face was sallow, and his hair had become sparse, making him look like an old man, completely devoid of the spirited demeanor he had before his illness. He shook his head, as if unwilling to say more about Evelyn. Over the years, Evelyn had taken lover after lover outside their marriage, and Eugene was not unaware of this. However, he had no right to stop her. Now, he lacked both the inclination and the energy to intervene. Sitting beside the hospital bed, I brought him 2 pieces of good news. The doctor said you can be discharged tomorrow, and Sophia is coming back tomorrow as well. Hearing this, Eugene's expression finally relaxed. He had long grown tired of staying in the hospital and had been waiting for Sophia's return all along. On the day Sophia returned, Evelyn, who had been away for over a week, came back as well. Upon hearing the news of her father's serious illness as soon as she returned, Sophia cried for a long time in Eugene's arms. Eugene's eyes reddened too, but he still comforted Sophia. Standing nearby, Evelyn was rarely at a loss. Like Eugene, she kept comforting Sophia, looking at her with a gaze that was almost motherly. After wiping away her tears, Sophia turned to Evelyn and took her hand, saying, "Aunt, I heard you've been helping take care of my dad all this time. Thank you so much for your hard work." Evelyn was smiling so wide she could have been a blooming flower. "Oh sweetheart, we're all family here. There's no need to say it was hard work." The three of them standing together looked even more like a close-knit family of three, making Sylvia and me seem like outsiders. During the 2 months of summer vacation that Sophia was at home, Evelyn also rarely went out. She would take care of Eugene together with Sophia. I often saw the three of them laughing and chatting together, and Eugene's gaze would frequently fall on those two, his eyes full of contentment. Time passed quickly. After Sophia started school, Evelyn also left our house, only visiting occasionally. Eugene's spirits grew worse day by day, his hair fell out in the 2nd month of chemotherapy. Sophia bought him all kinds of wigs and hats. Most of the time, Eugene just looked at them and rarely wore them, he hardly went out anymore. Severe physical wasting and the pain caused by the illness have made him increasingly reluctant to exercise. I always feel that Eugene's gaze towards me has been growing increasingly unsettling lately, as if he has done something wrong to me. What could he possibly have done that was wrong? He has already drawn up a will, leaving all his property to my daughter, Sophia. One day 3 months later, Eugene, who couldn't even drink water, suddenly said he was hungry, and his spirits seemed to brighten all at once. The nurse hurriedly called me, asking me to come over and see him. Both she and I knew that Eugene was experiencing a final burst of energy before passing. Before this, I had used a business trip as an excuse and hadn't visited him for over half a month. When I saw Eugene, I was shocked for a moment. In just half a month, he had become so thin that only skin was left on his bones. I sat in the accompanying seat by Eugene's bedside and asked how he was feeling. Eugene held my hand, his face, now so thin it seemed only skin remained, managing a faint smile. "I feel much better. It's as if all the strength that had disappeared has suddenly come back to me. That final surge of vitality, this must be it, like all the organs in the body have agreed to work together one last time." How could Eugene not know his own condition? He looked at me for a long time, then suddenly, tears began to fall. I heard him say, "Nina, I'm sorry." He tightened his grip on my hand, but he didn't have much strength left anyway. To me, it only felt like he was holding my hand a bit firmer. Eugene said, "If I don't tell you these things, I won't be able to rest even in death." This piqued my curiosity. "Eugene, you didn't do anything to wrong me, did you?" Eugene avoided my gaze, and after a long while, he said, "Nina, Sophia is actually my and Evelyn's child. Back then, while you were asleep after giving birth, I swapped the 2 children." I felt my vision go dark, and it took a long time before I could find my voice. "Are you saying that Sylvia is actually my daughter?" Eugene lowered his head, not daring to look at me or respond. But how could that be possible? When Sophia was 12, I did a paternity test with her, and the result showed a match consistent with a biological relationship. I have always known that Eugene doesn't like me. Back then, when his brother and my former husband died together in a mining accident, rumors began to circulate about him and his sister-in-law. After my husband passed away, my mother-in-law drove me back to my parents' home. She cursed me for bringing bad luck to my husband, saying that I had been the cause of her son's death. It was a ridiculous thing to say. After all, it was she who had arranged the job at the coal mine through connections in the first place, yet she ended up blaming everything on me. I had only stayed at my parents' home for a few days when my brother's wife began to give me cold looks, banging things around and speaking to me in a sarcastic tone. My mother was afraid of this outspoken sister-in-law, and could only advise me to find someone to marry while I was still young. It was at that time that Eugene's family sent a matchmaker to our house. Eugene was already 25 years old that year, and his family was truly poor to the point of not being able to make ends meet. No sensible family would willingly marry their daughter into such a household. When the matchmaker came to propose, my mother agreed without much hesitation. Originally, she had wanted to ask for some bride price, but seeing my pregnant belly, she ultimately couldn't bring herself to ask. Before getting married, I told Eugene the truth. I discovered I was pregnant only after my husband died. It would be understandable if Eugene couldn't accept it. Eugene hesitated for a long time, but still agreed to marry me. At that time, his family had a poor reputation in the village. His father died early, his mother suffered from a chronic illness and relied on medication all year round, and now even his older brother was gone. The villagers said it was because the feng shui of his family's ancestral grave was bad, which explained why their life was so difficult. If Eugene hadn't married me, he would most likely have remained single for the rest of his life. Eugene and I never held a wedding ceremony. All he did was pin a red flower to a borrowed bicycle, ride from his house to mine, and take me back to his home, and that was how we got married. It wasn't until after we were married that I learned about the affair between Eugene and his sister-in-law, Evelyn. By then, I realized I had been deceived, but there was nothing I could do. I didn't have a single penny to my name, my family wouldn't take me back, and without Eugene, I had nowhere to go. Life went on as best it could, day by day. It wasn't until I was over 2 months pregnant that Evelyn also discovered she was expecting. At that time, I calculated over and over again and finally realized that there was a high probability that Evelyn's child was Eugene's. I have never harbored any intention to harm others, but why do people around me keep scheming against me one by one? A dying man speaks honestly. Eugene rambled on about many things, confessing the foolish things he did in his youth. Did he truly regret doing these things? Of course not, he just hoped that if there really was a judge in the underworld, his sins would be considered a little lighter. Eugene's tears fell drop by drop on the back of my hand. He choked back sobs, almost unable to speak. Nina, I let you and Sylvia down. If there's a next life, will you marry me again? I'm willing to spend my whole life making it up to you both. He had schemed against me all my life, and even in his final moments, he was still paving the way for Evelyn. How could someone like him be worthy, let alone dare, to speak of a next life with me? I withdrew my hand from his grip and wiped each finger clean with a wet tissue. So, you wrote a will leaving all your assets to Sophia, just because you knew Sophia was your biological daughter? Eugene fell back into his old habit of silence to deal with me, just like when we had occasional disputes in our youth, saying nothing and subjecting me to emotional neglect. You've schemed for over 20 years, turned my daughter into a fool, and left all your assets to the daughter you had with your brother's wife. Given that, why on earth would you think I'd forgive you, Eugene? Eugene closed his eyes, his expression pained. Nina, please, considering I'm about to die. Why treat me this way? I interrupted him. Back then, I clearly asked for your opinion. I said if you couldn't accept the child, we could either not marry or abort, and you agreed to let me give birth to her. Eugene didn't answer my question, only stubbornly hoping for my forgiveness. He said he was dying, and if I didn't forgive him, he wouldn't rest in peace. Those things are already done, so why fear not resting in peace? I asked him, Eugene, if I were the one who swapped the babies, would you forgive me? Eugene's clouded gaze fell on me, and he gave his answer almost without hesitation. Yes, Nina. I know I've let you down in this lifetime, and no matter what you do, I will forgive you. I felt relieved hearing those words from him. I forced a cold smile. Sylvia's fever when she was 6, it could have been treated, couldn't it? Because Evelyn always thought Sylvia was my daughter, she never got Sylvia to the hospital in time, she was practically hoping Sylvia would die. Later, the doctor said that if Sylvia underwent rehabilitation, there was a high chance she could live independently in the future. At that time, both Eugene and I were present, and Evelyn even asked for Eugene's opinion. What did Eugene say? Eugene showed a pained expression but said, if she can't recover to normal, there's no need to waste time or money. This is simply this child's fate. They believed Sylvia was my child. If the child turned out slow, they said it was all fate. But what if Sylvia has always been their child from the very beginning? Outside the door, the sound of the caregiver talking to someone could be heard, likely someone had arrived, yet they chose not to come in. I looked at Eugene, trying to see past his outward appearance and understand what was truly going through his mind. Eugene, when you said you wanted to marry me back then, I actually thought about it a lot. I felt that if you genuinely treated me well, I would truly commit to building a life with you. And that's exactly how it turned out. I was never afraid of hardship. Despite how poor Eugene's family was, I still stayed and worked with him step by step to pull through. Eugene lowered his head, the expression on his face, now gaunt and little more than skin and bones, was impossible to discern. But you schemed against me, time and again. You didn't even spare my child. I stabbed his heart with my words, blow by blow. Eugene, I raised Sophia for over 20 years. Evelyn never raised her for a single day. Have you never thought that if she doesn't recognize Evelyn but only acknowledges me as her mother? Eugene lifted his head and looked at me calmly. Nina, you'll definitely scold me for saying this, but Sophia is Evelyn and my own daughter. She shares our blood, and deep down, we are inherently close. He continued, Evelyn told Sophia long ago, they recognized each other as mother and daughter when Sophia was in her second year of high school. As soon as he finished speaking, the door of the hospital room was pushed open. Evelyn, who had been eavesdropping outside for quite some time, walked into the room. Nina, she said with a smile that belonged to the victor, since you know everything now, it's time to return my daughter Sophia to me. Of course, you can take your little fool with you anytime you want. Seeing that I remained silent, she continued, raising her all these years has been no small burden for me. You know, a fool is much harder to look after than a normal person. The way she looked at me was as if she were gazing at a fool herself. For so many years, that's exactly how she had always looked at me. But who the real fool was, only I knew that for myself. Living among them, I feel as though everyone else is drunk while I alone am sober. So I have endured their behavior time and again. I know that only by letting them act arrogantly can I have the last laugh. But now, there is no longer any need to endure. I asked them, you've always claimed that Sophia is your biological daughter. Have you ever done a DNA test? Eugene and Evelyn were taken aback. Evelyn, with a look of disdain, retorted, when Eugene took the child over, I was following right along. What's there to verify? I think people shouldn't leave this world with regrets, especially Eugene, considering we were once a married couple. So, I took out the copy of the paternity test that I always carried with me from my bag. One copy I tossed to Evelyn, the other to Eugene. What is this? Evelyn casually flipped through the pages, but when she spotted Sophia's name, disbelief washed over her face. She hurriedly turned to the last page. How could this be? The paternity test results between Sophia and me confirm a biological relationship. I kindly explained to them, when Sophia was 12, I already took her for a paternity testing. What, haven't you done a paternity test with Sylvia? Eugene was also stunned, his confused mind couldn't wrap around it for a long time, and he only murmured, I clearly switched the children. He did switch the children, but I switched them back later. A man who was entangled with his sister-in-law even before marriage, how could I possibly not guard against him? After learning that his reason for marrying me was to cover up his dirty dealings with his sister-in-law, I became even more wary of both of them. Staring at the two of them, who looked almost stupefied with shock, I continued twisting the knife in their hearts. You two really are cruel, treating your own daughter that way. How does it feel to have turned your own child into a fool? If Evelyn had treated Sylvia properly, how could a perfectly fine girl like Sylvia have turned into a fool? At first, when I saw how they treated Sylvia, I couldn't help but feel compassion. But later, when I realized they were treating her that way because they thought she was my daughter, all my pity vanished instantly. To be merciful to the enemy is to be cruel to oneself. All of Eugene's vitality was finally exhausted. He lay slumped on the hospital bed, his eyes wide open, with only his last breath remaining. I was a bit confused. Didn't you just confess that you were sorry for me? And said you were willing to repay me in the next life? Now you don't have to confess, nor do you owe me anything. Aren't you happy? And besides, I just asked you. If I were the one who swapped the children, you said you'd forgive me. You even said you'd forgive me no matter what I did. Eugene could no longer speak. His eyes had lost focus, fixed somewhere in empty space, but his lips still twitched, as if he were mumbling something. Evelyn finally snapped to her senses. She threw herself in front of Eugene, grabbing the front of his hospital gown with both hands, so frantic that her words became incoherent. Eugene, the will, revise it, Charles, yes, contact attorney Charles first. She scrambled to find her phone and make the call. I watched as Eugene's pupils gradually dilated and uttered the final words I had prepared for him: a person cannot do too much evil, there will be retribution. By the time Ryan arrived at the hospital with the lawyer, Eugene had already breathed his last breath. His eyes were wide open, and I tried several times but couldn't close them. It truly was as he had said: if I didn't forgive him, he wouldn't rest in peace even in death. I suppose he no longer needed my forgiveness. When Eugene breathed his last breath, his eyes were fixed on the ceiling, refusing to close no matter what. Attorney Charles shook his head and sighed, confirming that the will was ironclad: all assets were to go to Sophia. Evelyn collapsed on the spot, screaming as she lunged at Eugene's body, tearing at his hospital gown and crying out, "This is mine. It's all mine." But no matter how she carried on, the law was the law, she wasn't getting a thing. Ryan, who had been standing by putting on a show of comforting her, pulled a face longer than a donkey's the moment he realized the inheritance was out of reach. He sneered, shaking off Evelyn's grip. "Didn't you say it was a sure thing? I put up this act with you for so long, and this is what it comes to. Get lost, and stop bothering me." Without another glance, he walked away, blocking all of Evelyn's contacts from that day forward. Evelyn's so-called inseparable bond had, as it turned out, been nothing more than a ploy for money. Evelyn explained the course of events to Lawyer Charles in a somewhat incoherent manner. Lawyer Charles asked for more details and finally reviewed the paternity test report I had given to Evelyn. He adjusted his glasses and said, "This paternity test report is genuine. If what you said is true, the will took effect the moment the natural person established it. Now that the natural person has passed away, the will cannot be altered." Evelyn's voice cracked with despair. "But that's not his biological daughter, my daughter is his real child. How can he leave the inheritance to an outsider?" Lawyer Charles shook his head again and said, "According to Article 1133 of the law, a natural person may dispose of personal property by making a will in accordance with the provisions of this law and may designate an executor of the will. A natural person may designate one or several legal heirs to inherit personal property through a will. A natural person may donate personal property to the state, a collective, or organizations or individuals other than legal heirs through a will. A natural person may establish a testamentary trust in accordance with the law." He continued to explain, Article 1127 states that the first-order heirs include the spouse, children, and parents. This means that, in the absence of a will specifying otherwise, both the spouse and children are entitled to inherit the estate. However, once Eugene establishes a will and clearly designates Sophia as the heir, the estate will be distributed according to the will's instructions, no longer following the statutory order of inheritance. Therefore, leaving the estate solely to the child and not to the spouse can indeed be achieved through the establishment of a will. In other words, if there had been no will at the time, Evelyn could have used the paternity test report between Sylvia and Eugene to pursue a share of the estate. Back then, she was so eager to have Eugene make a will because she was afraid that half of the assets would be taken by me, the spouse, in the end. Truth be told, I never coveted Eugene's wealth. I've been working all these years, and my salary is more than enough to support Sophia and me. But who would say no to something that comes for free? She schemed and plotted, only to end up with nothing. I never schemed for anything, yet I gained everything. When Ryan found out that Evelyn didn't get Eugene's assets, he turned grim and scolded her several times before storming off angrily. He was only with Evelyn because he coveted Eugene's inheritance. Now that there's no hope left, he's not willing to put on an act for even a second longer. Evelyn still refuses to believe it. She spent most of her life looking down on me, and she can't accept that, with Eugene gone, all the good fortune seems to have landed squarely on my head. But what she truly can't bear is the fact that Sylvia is actually her daughter. After all, no one knows better than she does how she has treated Sylvia over the past 20-some years. She keeps insisting on finding Sophia, convinced that my paternity test is fake. She's demanding to have a paternity test done with Sophia. Sophia had no objection to this, she had always treated Evelyn kindly. "Auntie, just go ahead and make the arrangements. I am free any time during this period." Evelyn couldn't wait to take Sophia to the hospital. The expedited paternity test results could be obtained within 24 hours. Evelyn was the kind of person who wouldn't give up until she saw the truth. After receiving the paternity test report, she finally accepted the reality. After scheming and working hard for half a lifetime, she ended up paving the way for our mother and daughter. She was so enraged that she was hospitalized directly. I heard she still has debts outside, and I originally wanted to wait until the inheritance was in hand to coax Sophia into taking out a portion to repay them. Now, everything has fallen through. It's not that Sophia has a good capacity for acceptance. I told her the whole truth when she was 12 years old. I raised her all by myself, and the strength I had instilled in her countless times came in handy this time. I have to admit that Eugene has always been very good to Sophia, though there's a strong possibility that this kindness is partly due to him believing Sophia is his biological daughter. So, initially, Sophia found it quite difficult to accept, and she remained in low spirits for a long time. However, after understanding the schemes that Eugene and Evelyn had plotted against me, Sophia still chose to stand on my side. She said, "Mom, you haven't done anything wrong, they shouldn't have treated you this way." During Sophia's freshman year in high school, Evelyn began discreetly reaching out to her. Just as I had suspected, Evelyn believes that Sophia is her biological daughter, and now that Sophia is grown, she wants to reclaim her. Every time Evelyn contacts Sophia, she tells me about it. Sometimes Sophia can't figure it out either, and she asks me, "Mom, why didn't Dad marry Evelyn back then?" I've certainly thought about this before. After his brother died, he could have married his sister-in-law. Such things are rare, but not unheard of. It was only later that I figured it out, because he couldn't bear the gossip in the village, and also, he wasn't as satisfied with Evelyn as he had imagined. Deep down, Eugene is actually very cowardly, a point that can be seen from the poverty in his family. No matter where a grown man goes, he should be able to carve out a path for himself, but he was content with the status quo. In fact, there was another reason Eugene didn't marry Evelyn. Back then, Eugene's mother didn't like Evelyn either. Her eldest son was clearly doing well in carpentry, but because Evelyn looked down on his low earnings and argued with him all day long, she eventually forced him into mining. Eugene's mother said the exact same words to my ex-mother-in-law. She claimed Evelyn was a jinx to her husband. That mining accident claimed the lives of many women's husbands, and the women who lost their husbands were also burdened with the label of being a jinx to their spouses. These burdens were imposed by one woman upon another. The pent-up emotions had to find an outlet eventually. As for right and wrong, black and white, there was nothing more to say. Eugene's mother didn't like me either, especially after she found out I was pregnant. She despised it and outright said I had to get rid of the child before I could enter her home. Later, I don't know what Eugene said to her, but she didn't bring up getting rid of the child again. She just said that after I gave birth to this one, I needed to hurry and have another one that was biologically Eugene's. Unfortunately, right after my child was born, the one-child policy was implemented, allowing only one child per family. At that time, Eugene said he would treat my child as his own. Back then, I was touched for a moment and truly grateful that, no matter when, I never let my emotions cloud my judgment. On the day I gave birth, Evelyn fell in the courtyard, and the child in her belly, which was not yet full term but had been claimed as full term for a long time, was finally about to be born. Evelyn and I gave birth at the same hospital. At that moment, I became wary. Evelyn's fall seemed very suspicious. It felt as though she had deliberately waited to give birth on the same day as me. I have always trusted my intuition, so I remained vigilant. After giving birth, even though I was exhausted to the point of barely being able to open my eyes, I bit the tip of my tongue to keep myself awake. I examined the baby carefully and didn't allow myself to fall asleep until I saw a red birthmark behind her ear. Just as I expected, when I woke up, Eugene cheerfully placed the baby in my arms. Newborns all have wrinkled little faces and look quite similar. While Eugene wasn't paying attention, I checked the baby's ear. There was no birthmark behind the baby's ear. At that time, I began to doubt myself. Was the birthmark behind the child's ear just a dream I had? Fortunately, I wasn't the type to dwell on things. Since doubts arose, I decided to verify them. Despite the pain, I asked Eugene to hold the child and suggested we go see my sister-in-law. Eugene was somewhat reluctant, but he eventually had to tend to both new mothers. His sister-in-law also couldn't do without him. In those days, giving birth often meant staying in the hospital for just one day before heading home. If my child was really switched, to get my own back, it must be done before leaving the hospital. In those days, surveillance cameras were rare. After confirming that Evelyn's child indeed had a red birthmark behind the ear, I began planning how to swap the children back. There is only one opportunity to swap the children back, and that is when we all go home together. While Eugene is helping Evelyn out the door and into the car, I use the fastest speed I can muster in my entire life to switch the two babies' blankets. Evelyn still refused to give up. She sued me, determined to reclaim the share of property that Eugene had left behind. I have Eugene's will in my hands, how could she possibly sue successfully? Moreover, Eugene and Sylvia never underwent a paternity test. Later, she started playing the sympathy card, coming to my house again and again, crying and telling me how difficult it was for her to raise Sylvia and how she needed money to treat Sylvia's illness. But Sylvia's condition had already been neglected because of her. One day, Sophia read a book and joked with me with a smile, "Mom, you confessed everything before Dad died. Aren't you afraid he might come back to life and seek revenge on you? How could there be rebirth in this world? Even if such good fortune did exist, it shouldn't befall fools. Even if he has been reborn with memories from a past life, that doesn't necessarily mean I can't be his match. A mind as deep as the ocean will eventually drown in its own depths. It's better to be open and honest, walking together into the sunlight." Evelyn refused to accept defeat. First, she sued me, accusing me of forging the paternity test and fraudulently claiming the inheritance. At the trial, I calmly presented all the evidence from back then, the paternity test from when Sophia was 12, the hospital birth records, and even the photos I secretly took of the swaddling blanket when the children were swapped. I had prepared a backup plan long ago. The judge saw that Evelyn's lawsuit was purely malicious litigation. Not only was it dismissed, but she was also ordered to pay all my legal costs. Even worse, the high-interest loans Evelyn had accumulated over the years finally caught up with her. She had been hoping to turn things around with the inheritance, but her creditors cornered her in the rundown rental she lived in and took all her remaining valuables. Wailing and crying, she went to Sophia, trying to guilt-trip her for money. "Sophia, your aunt raised you for so many years. You can't just stand by and watch me suffer like this." Sophia looked at her coldly. "Aunt? Did you ever raise me? All you raised were your schemes. Ever since you secretly approached me in my second year of high school, I knew exactly what you were up to. It's a shame, you can't even recognize your own biological daughter, and now you've hurt her so badly. Are you even worthy of being a mother?" Evelyn still wanted to cling desperately, but Sophia simply called the police and reported her for harassment. When the police arrived, the old incident of Evelyn abusing Sylvia back in the day resurfaced. Neighbors, hospital records, and even testimony from caregivers all pointed to her long-term abuse of children with intellectual disabilities. The court ruled guilty of abuse, 15 days of detention, plus compensation of $100,000 in emotional damages for Sylvia. When Evelyn was released, she was completely broken. Her hair had turned gray, her clothes were tattered, and all of her former arrogance was gone. She wanted to look for Sylvia, but I had already taken Sylvia away long before. Yes, I brought Sylvia home. Although she's not biologically my daughter, over these more than 20 years, I have loved her as my own. What's more, she is the one who is truly innocent. I hired the best rehabilitation doctor and accompany her in her treatments every day. A miracle occurred, because there was actually room for remedy for the treatment that was delayed back then after the high fever. Sylvia's intelligence gradually recovered. Although she couldn't return to normal completely, she became able to take care of herself and even learned simple tasks. When she clearly called me mom for the first time, I cried, and she hugged me and smiled. Sophia was also exceptionally good to her. The two sisters went shopping and watched movies together, living life just like a normal family. After receiving the inheritance, we moved into a large house in the city center. Sylvia had her own room, filled with plenty of sunlight and stocked with her favorite cartoon DVDs. As for Evelyn, the last I heard of her was that she was begging on the streets. Someone recognized her and filmed a video, posting it online with the title, "She schemed for half a lifetime, and in the end, even her own daughter wants nothing to do with her." The comments section was filled with curses. Serves her right. She harmed others and ruined herself. She wanted to hide, but there was nowhere to escape. In this life, she finally tasted the bitterness of being despised by everyone. As for me, along with my two daughters, life just keeps getting better. The sun shines in, warm and radiant. I occasionally think, if I hadn't been so vigilant back then, if I hadn't swapped the child back, no, there are no what-ifs. Calculations as deep as the sea will ultimately drown oneself. The wicked plot and scheme, only to dig their own graves in the end. As for good people? The three of us, mother and daughters, have finally embraced the sunshine together, and life keeps getting better.